And now I'm very happy to turn the mic over to Andres Montoya's younger brother, the incredible artist and writer, Maceo Montoya.
Thank you, Connie. And thank you all again for this incredible, moving event. I remember years ago when I first graduated from college, and I picked up Andres's work again, and I started reading it not as a little brother, but as someone who aspired to be a writer. And Andres, I was learning through his words, and for years I thought that maybe it was just me and Andres, right? That I was the only one left reading his words. And it was a lonely feeling at the same time. It was a feeling that propelled me, that continued to propel me further into learning the craft. And it wasn't until 2007, I think, that Francisco Aragon, he wrote a review of Manuel Paul Lopez's book, Death of a Mexican, and other poems. And he mentioned that Andres was a mentor, or that a guide for Paul Lopez's work. And so I bought Paul Lopez's book, and I remember when it arrived in the mail, and I just tore at the packaging, and I just flipped through the book, and Manuel Paul Lopez talked about what Andres meant to him. And he acknowledged that he had never met the man, and yet knew him through his words, and his words had inspired him. That moment filled me with hope that I wasn't alone in reading Andres's work. Right? There was someone else out there who had discovered his words. And so to go from that to a year or two later, when Daniel Chacon put together, along with Lee Herrick and the In the Grove, the journal dedicated to Andres, and all these poets gathered in Fresno. And I remember driving down, and I was so excited. I was so excited to see these people that I had heard about, and to be able to meet them, and to think that all these years, like 10 years later, I now consider them not just friends, but family, right? A family of poets, and they have all been so generous to me. I joke that I pull the Andres card. You know, I email them out of the blue and I say, can you take a look at my manuscript? Can you come speak in my class? Can you do this for me? And their generosity has overwhelmed me. And to see their faces here today, to be able to celebrate Andres and his work, it's just so meaningful. I think it's so fitting that this symposium happens here at Fresno State. I think it was yesterday that Daniel Chacon mentioned, the start of a narrative. And I was just talking with my mom earlier about the day that they came to register Andres for classes. And to me, Andres he wasn't afraid of anything, right? He made you afraid. But I guess when he didn't want to go by himself, right? I don't want to leave the car. I don't want to go by myself. And he made my parents go and walk him to register for classes. And so to go from that moment, right? That moment on the precipice, right? What his life became from that moment to here today, right? Where we're at Fresno State, where we come together and we celebrate his impact as a poet, which is so tied, of course, to his experience here at Fresno State, but also in this region. I want to acknowledge my parents, Leslie and Malachias. If you guys could just stand. I want to acknowledge Andres' mom, Joanna. You could just raise your hand. And so it's wonderful to see you here, Joanna. I want to thank, of course, I'm here, I'm representing my siblings. And if you could just raise your hands, third, Macario, Marcela, there. Um, Rolando Hinojosa, he talked about being a young writer as empapado, drunk, imbibed, drenched with literature. And I remember when I felt that way in Knights Landing, where I moved after school, when I was in New York, when I was in Ayutla, Jalisco, and every day it seemed I had another book at my side. And I picked up a book and I felt like I had an obligation to finish it, right? And you know, over time, right, my energy changed. And I'm not get distracted by the news online or reading emails, or I pick up books and I get distracted. And yet, the current that has continued throughout that time is this great desire to be a writer. And not just a writer, I want to be a great writer. And I think many of us feel that way. And the way that I describe it is it burns inside of me. It eats at me. I go to bed at night and it's eating at me. And I wake up in the morning and it's still there. And I think back to Knights Landing when I first started thinking about maybe I'll be an artist, but also I'll write. And maybe Andres, this connection that we have, maybe he left his words behind, right? Maybe I can go in search of them. The feeling started then. Andres died as a young writer, and he had written a great book. And as the years go by, and I'm older than Andres, I still can't believe that I'm older than Andres. I think about the man that he would have become, the writer that he would have become. And we do change, we evolve, and I see that change on the page. Right? The stories that touch me, the stories, how I tell them, my language on the page, it changes. I'm different than I was at 25, than I was at 30, and at 37 I'm different still. And so I think about Andres and how he would have evolved as a writer, intellectually, spiritually. And our family sits around sometimes and we say, you know, would he have been able to sustain his fervor, right, as a Christian, as a believer? Eleanor was, where's Eleanor? Andres wasn't gentle. He was the opposite of gentle, at least from my perspective. But we all saw what happened when he met Eleanor. He became gentle. It was incredible to see. And so we wonder what kind of husband he would have become, what kind of father he would have become. Right? Writer, educator, the books that he would have created. And so I know that Andres, he wanted to be a great writer, and I know it must have eaten at him, right? So what do we do with our failed ambitions, right? And inevitably, right, to one degree or another, our lives are cut short, right? We don't have enough time. We can't sustain whatever that intensity, right? We get distracted. All of that happens to us, right? We're bound to lose this battle that we have with literature. So what do we make of that? And I've heard it said that a writer's body of work is a cathedral. Andres would have liked that metaphor. But he wasn't able to create his cathedral. But I think that this event, this symposium, is an example for us. Because Andres, through his words and his spirit, he created a platform. He created this, a foundation for us to gather, for us to talk about his work, for us to share his poetry. And Andres approached life as a poet. Poetry as a son, as a brother, as a teacher. Poetry weaved throughout his life. He would have created so much more. But I think that through our words that we create, through carrying Andres in our hearts, that we fulfill in some small way his potential. Thank you. So I'd like now to introduce my cousin, Andres' cousin, Richard Montoya, who is the founder of the influential comedy troupe, Culture Clash. He's also a filmmaker, a writer, a poet. He's done so much for Chicano culture, for Chicano art, letters, in so many different arenas. And he's always been an inspiration to me. I know that Andres loved his work, and so I reached out to him about coming and speaking at this event, and I was so grateful that he was able to find the time. So I want to welcome Richard Montoya.
Handsome Maceo. Uncle Mel, Leslie, Joanne, so good to see you, Andres' mother. I asked if you came in from Carruthers today, but you don't live in Carruthers no more. Because we don't want any trouble with Carruthers tonight, okay? I'm gonna kind of follow Maceo, which is not easy to do, but I'm gonna project as my theater chops. We're more of a performance troupe, Culture Clash, and the comedy thing, you know, I think that we took our lumps early on when the Chileans kicked us out of Berkeley for bringing Che Guevara back to life and then killing him again. And they couldn't believe I was Uncle Mel's nephew. And they were like, Uncle Mel's our hero, get out of here, Culture Clash. And, very well deserved those early days. You know, my day started at USC. There was a Radical Narratives conference. Nothing says fun like Radical Narratives conference. And, as I pulled into the campus, the one side said immigration conference this way and imagination conference that way. And the imagination conference had happy, smiley faces and looked like, you know, Coachella, and the immigration was all sad this way. And before I left, I just wanted to point them at each other, because this is what we do, is we bring imagination, you know, to the frontera, to the border. And I want to speak a little bit about how Andres' work over the years has spoke to me, and I'm honored to be here and humbled with my family. We came in from LA, my wife, not 100% comfortable, expecting our second, and little mountains running around with his primos and his cousins. So this is a family event, and I really wanted to find ways to honor Andres, our primo, and this giant that I didn't quite get when we were standing right next to each other. I remember we reached out to each other in Portland in these wild places, and Andres and his buddies were gonna come see us in Portland. But this idea of where things intersect is important to me, borders, and the idea of borders and walls at this particular moment, because wherever you find a border, you'll find Mexicans, you'll find ice workers, you'll find Filipinos, you'll find domestics, you'll find women nursing children that aren't their own. And the border between Brentwood and Westwood, the border between Fresno and Westside Fresno, the border between Pasadena and South Pasadena, the border between Boyle Heights and East Los, you know? That's where you'll find us, and that's where you'll find these poems, and that's where you'll find Andres. The literary landscape of the Valley is so intense for me and for so many in this room. Our laureates, our artists, up and down the 99. I don't know what's in the water from Stockton to Bakers, but there's something in the water. And it's a literary roadmap that Andres is now firmly enmeshed in the roadmap, you know? Not just Soto's, not just, I have no problems with Gary Soto, so don't start nothing tonight. But you know, Juan Felipe's, and you know, the artists, Esther Hernandez, Malaquias, the Fowler Cemetery has a clutch of these people in the tierra there, the sand and the soil. So that Andres is, as Maceo said, so young, but I'll give you an example. I was traveling at Christmas time. We come to see my wife's family in Layton. where my grandpa Malaquias and Uncle Mel and my dad used to go looking for either Joaquin Murrieta's treasure or... And it turns out it was right on the curve. Is it the Kings River right there? And Chelo's, my suegro, his land, and my mother-in-law, their land abuts right there in these oak trees. And it could very well be that they were looking for treasure on their property, or what would become their property. So this idea of mapping the Fowler and the Fresno area, I was heading east out of Adams in Fowler, and I came across this abandoned, beautiful Victorian that still had dishes in the cupboards and beautiful lace curtains, albeit soiled, besotted. And I looked at this house, it stopped me, and I started posting pictures, and I was looking for something out there. That land out there is full of ranches, still owned by my mother's side of the family, the Arab side of my family. I'm 1/4 Arab, as all my brothers and sisters are. It's this side. It's the la 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 la. You hear? It's this side, right? I can do that because I'm 1/4 Arab. But where the Arabs, the Árabes married into the Mexican families, the Rodriguez family. Their uncle was Louis Rodriguez. You understand what I'm saying? El Louis. Hoy enterraron a Louis, which I heard, as my son's age, I heard in a storefront just in downtown Fresno, Luis Valdez, Danny Valdez, Manuel Piquet, Agustin Lira, all of them, front and center, played a Louis for my dad just before they went off to Europe to perform it. And my dad, my mom, and 6 little Montoyas, we weren't quite sure what we were looking at, but it was beautiful. It was intense. We were 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way up. And Luis's timbre at that age of a young man. I didn't quite understand that poem, till much later. But heading out on Adams, I made a left at that house, and there was a state mental institution on that particular corner, and it said Del Rey this way. So I'm thinking Crazy Gypsy, and I want to go look for the ghost of Crazy Gypsy. I've got Andres on my mind. I carry my dog-eared Ice Worker Sings book and my dad's book side by side. I'm out there, and I come across this humongous irrigation ditch that I'm always talking to my suegro about because he's a rancher of hundreds of acres of walnuts in Layton. And I see this massive irrigation ditch, and it's called the Fowler Switch. And it's very dramatic. And in Andres's work, there's a lot about the irrigation ditches. My dad had a love for the irrigation ditches, where in the flotsam of that water, our DNA lies in these irrigation ditches. And this Fowler Switch is dramatic. And I realized what was so dramatic about it is there's a switch there, so whoever the switchman is, it's like, that day is the water going to Fowler, or is it going to go to Parlier, And that was very dramatic to me. Who would get the water that day? And it doesn't quite work that way, but it doesn't matter. I was trying to make a little movie in my head. And then continue north to Del Rey, where Teatro Campesino first had its storefront. Many, many lifetimes ago. When I'm out on those roads, and when I'm standing in cartel country of Nogales and Tucson, and I'm standing in the doorway of a 15-year-old slain boy, and I'm talking to his abuela, his grandmother, her grief, her tears, her anger, her desire for justice, is an Andres Montoya poem. And my God, I've read that poem so many times, and there I am standing on not so safe ground. And so this intersection, this border of where his faith, his love of God, his Christ meets the work, I didn't quite get it at first, but as I've aged, I've stood in some of those same places looking for mercy, looking for grace, and a sometimes very violent world. And Andres was ahead of that by decades. When we were still worried about being those comedians, Andres was chiseling these words. And I go back and I read his words, and I see now a kind of a defiance in his embrace of his Christ. I wouldn't have done that. But that's not what's important, and that's what tonight's not about. It's about him. So tonight, for just one night, being a cut from the quasi-socialistic cloth of a Montoya, I grew up thinking those were Che Guevara posters, those were Uncle Mel posters, that was Uncle Mel. And arguing with my brothers, no, it's Dad, no, it looks just like Uncle Mel. We thought that those posters were him. Soy comunista, tú sabes. And I'm always having to explain my politics, but when Andres eulogized my grandmother Lucy, they had a kinship, you see. And lo to everyone that had to follow Andres that day, because his hallelujahs and his embrace was right at that border of his literary genius, and it towered. It's, again, that little unease, but the book is dog-eared because we find ourselves out there on those roadside crosses in Nogales or Highway 99, and especially out in the desert of Nogales or Cartel Country, there's not much more than faith. There's not much more than the simple grace of a cross. And so tonight, I just wanted to recognize that in Andres. I'd never really quite done that. And just say that I find the richness in that and the complexity. Because at that very same funeral for my grandma Lucy, my father Jose was doing the 4 directions at the gravesite. And the preacher assigned to Grandma Lucy's funeral that day, my dad was doing, and we looked to the north, and we looked to the south, and that humble was Montoya away, and we looked to the east. The preacher was a few feet behind him, saying, "Stand behind me, Satan, stand behind me, devil." And so there becomes this nuanced and not so nuanced, pitched battle for souls from the baptism to the grave. And you factor in the Arabs, the Fowler, the Jewish part of our family, the Sephardic possibilities on the New Mexico side, and you have this rich, extremely complicated fabric that, for me, is very much Andres. And tonight, in his grace and in his mercy, I see justice, I see Cesar, I see Lucy Montoya, I see his beloved Christ, maybe not mine, but I see his, and I'll accept that. And it's a small price to pay for the huge talent that he was. And it's not an asterisk next to his name. It makes Andres that much more complex, that much more beautiful, that much more relevant today when you're standing in Cartel Country and they're watching you and you're just trying to do your job as a writer, as a chronicler, as someone that's out there to get the story. Andres was doing that decades ago, standing in dangerous places, whether it be the west side of Fresno or Chinatown, or wherever he captured the book. You could still feel this book burn off the page. I want to leave you with this, because Maceo was so brief in his remarks and merciful. There's so many brilliant people in the Montoya family, and it really starts from our grandmother, Luciana, all the way down to that little girl that's in Chero's belly, and she insisted on coming to Fresno today with me. Nothing says party in Fresno like bringing your pregnant wife. She wanted to come, and she's director of education at the California African American Museum, and we're all so proud. And I said, well, I want to go have a drink with Timmy Z, you know. And she's like, I don't think Tim Z's drinking anymore. I said, sometimes no doesn't mean no. In Spanish, sometimes no means por qué no. Tim Z, I see you there hiding, but I don't know. They have to bend that little arm of yours, brother. The golden arm of Tim Z Hernandez, another beautiful Valley brothers and our sisters that are out here. I want to make my case very briefly. From Andres' poem, The Alley. His sister of the huge owl-like eyes saw the whole thing. Not a drop of juice fell from his quiet body without the angry contempt of her breath. And his mother came screaming. Benny watched them from the window of the tiny bedroom, his little sister of the huge slanting eyes, eyes that surely witnessed in another time, in another land, now foreign, Moctezuma slain, played on the bed, life being still good to her at that age. But Benny felt sorry for himself by feeling sorry for her. He felt numb, sorrow for many things, and he felt anger, and his mother came screaming. I can't tell the difference between Andres and Jose Montoya, and that is a wonderful thing. Thank you all so much. To you, cousin. Hallelujah.